We've gone through a lot of game dev cycles in our studio at this point, and I've kind of started discovering this spidey sense of realizing when games are gonna be successful, or at least gonna reach the finish line with us, yes, and when they're gonna be somewhere along the way, whether that is a month in the future or 3 months in the future, probably not going to make it. It's something I didn't notice back then, but now looking back, I can definitely tell that there is a correlation between all of them, and that is the fact that games have different momentum, is basically. And that's what I want to talk about in this video, because I think momentum is one of the most important things to make sure for you personally, not speaking from a technical thing of knowing how to do the art or knowing how to do the code, to actually make sure your game's gonna reach the finish line. If you have no clue what is momentum, okay, momentum is basically the fact that every week you feel like your game is making progress. It's very much a psychological thing almost, where maybe even your game is not objectively making a lot of progress, but the way you feel about it is like, hey, every day, every week, whatever, my game is improving, my game is getting better. And this is one of the biggest motivators for us at least, and I'm pretty sure because humanity is based upon this, I think as well, is keeping that momentum up, keeping pushing forward and not feeling like your game is regressing or kind of not moving forward. There's this saying in Dutch that I really like as well, stilstaan is achteruit gaan, which translates to, hey, standing still is actually going backwards. And you may be wondering, cool story bro, Marnix, like why should I care? And like I said, there's probably a whole bunch of science about this, but take this bro science from me. This is the most important thing, like I said, because progress fuels motivation, and motivation is allowing you to actually release that game. Because you have in regular self-improvement YouTube as well, they talk about this often, there's like two kinds of ways to do it. You can be motivated and you can have discipline. And discipline is just, even if you don't like it, still doing the hard work, still working on making progress towards your game. The problem is you're not making like a boring business. What you're doing is you're making a game and you need to have fun. If you're not having fun with making your game, yeah, you can discipline yourself all the way through it, and to a certain degree, yeah, there will gonna be parts of game development that you're not gonna like, but if you zoom out on a week by week basis, I think is a good idea. If every week your game feels like it's improving and every week you're getting further, there's an extra gameplay mechanic, there's an extra loop, there is something more, or maybe it could even just be like, hey, you've did a complete overhaul of the visuals and of the sound effects and things like that, and the game feels much better. That is going to be 10 times, maybe even 100 times better than just waking up and opening up your computer and being like, okay, I have to discipline is the way, I have to just release my game. Definitely in certain point of time, you're gonna have to use that. Sometimes you're gonna have to do stuff that you don't really like, but actually seeing that momentum where it snowballs as well, because momentum is not just linear. Every week, if you're doing this correct and if you're working on a good game with a good momentum, you're going to make more and more progress, or it's gonna feel like more and more you're reaching the end stages. You're not just gonna be like, oh yeah, I guess our game improved week over week. No, you're gonna be like, oh my God, if we go back 2 weeks or even just 1 week, the game we played back then, the game we had back then, and it was so bad. If you look back and you're like, hey, actually, yeah, the game hasn't changed that much, you may be like, hey, that's a good thing. Generally, you always wanna look back and kind of cringe at what your game used to be, because that means that you have improved, that means your game has changed. It's similar with like these YouTube videos and things like that. If I go and look back at like the videos from 1.5 years ago, yeah, I'm gonna cringe as well, because maybe I was saying dumb stuff. I didn't fully understand what I was talking about. But that means, once again, we've made progress and there is momentum. And I think especially for us, this is very important, because momentum in teams is even more interesting, because we work with multiple people on a single game. If you're a solo developer, this is kind of less of a thing because you are the team, for better or worse, usually for worse. The moment one of the two people loses momentum already, it gets harder to still have that vision, to still be invigorated about working on your game, because you start getting doubts of, hey, is this going to work? Is this going to be worth it? Yes or no? Or is this game kind of dumb? I don't really like it anymore. The good thing is, by the other teammate, they can give more momentum kinda and pick up the slack and be like, hey, no, look at what we did last week, look at what we have now. Kind of pushing them back into realizing, hey, we're making good momentum, we're making good progress. But the moment one of the two team members is already kind of feeling bogged down, that's putting extra load on the other team member, because now, if you don't keep this in check and you don't watch out, it may feel like they're working on the game alone, which, oh my God, if there's a way to kill momentum and like will to work on your game if you're in a team very quickly, it's by having someone else on the team just drop out. You want to avoid these things, and momentum is one of the key indicators to see, are we actually making good progress? Now, what are some of the things that kind of kill your momentum? That's probably what you're asking for, like, okay, yeah, isn't it normal that every week my game is better? Yeah, but it's not that easy as you may think. One of the biggest things is endless refactoring. It's probably one of the biggest things. You always want to make sure that, hey, there's at least something extra to your game. Because I know, our audience, you guys are programmers. You guys love writing your interfaces, you guys love refactoring, and you guys love justifying why spending 2 months on a complete system rewrite is gonna be worth it. The problem you have here is, to a certain degree, you have like a safety margin of, okay, you can go 1-2 weeks without making that momentum because you're like, hey, you're rewriting it, but you're not improving much. Or you can improve things. Even if you look at performance, for example, we recently did a rewrite in the path finding for our game Magical Girl Gardens, which is a survivor-like, because we ran into a whole bunch of like performance issues, and basically we were killing the host machine because we had too many path finding and it wasn't optimized and whatever. And visually, not much changes. It's just a rewrite. We take out Unity nav mesh and we throw in A-star because A-star is superior. Pretty sure our developers would want to marry A-star. But even then, whilst not as visual, there's still progress, mainly from a performance aspect then. I think if you have those upgrades as well, it helps. But if you just spend weeks flailing around trying to figure out how do I make my systems like more balanced or whatever, and you rewrite your code and you scrap it and you rewrite it again, it's like a predatory loan. It keeps coming back more and more. The deeper you go into debt, in not having those cool updates, into not having any more momentum, the harder it's going to be to get out of that. Because maybe if you had 2 weeks and your game hadn't made as much progress, you can be like, actually, I'm gonna add some more sound effects and I'm gonna pretty up the UI. And that is enough to get back above like your zero balance. You're not in debt anymore and your game is starting to be fun. I hope this analogy makes sense. But if you spend 2 months working on your game and then you're like, okay, no, I need to have a win. I'm gonna make the UI and I'm gonna add more sounds. It's going to not be enough to kind of get out of that debt, basically. You're not gonna reach past that threshold of being in the positive again, having enough momentum again to want to keep going at it. Don't just tell yourself, oh, I'm gonna refactor it and I'm only gonna stop when I'm done. That is something that can make sense maybe in your mind, but I think especially if you want to keep doing this for a long time and like the stuff that you're doing, you should keep in mind that, hey, even if I'm not making progress on a certain thing, like I said, I keep bringing this up, but this is such an easy W and it's something you can always work on to improve your game. It's things like sounds, VFX and game feel and things like that. It doesn't have to be giant things, but every week you want to have a better game. And then another thing that, well, that kind of kills your momentum is straying too far from your original scope. So this is a separate problem where it's not, okay, we're adding more work, but we're adding work that I actually didn't plan for in the beginning. This is kind of a rough one on how do you exactly solve this. It's gonna need some introspection. It is when, okay, let's say we wanted to make a certain game A, and it was gonna be a Souls-like in a specific setting. I'll just say something like that. But you realize, hey, actually making Souls-likes is kind of hard. Let's pivot into something else. And you generally don't do an immediate pivot where you go from game A to game B, but you have like 10 different little steps in between it. And before you know it, you get a Ship of Theseus situation where every mechanic in your game has kind of changed, but it's not the game that you wanted to make originally anymore. And that can be super demotivating because you remember that original vision. Maybe you look back at your old game design document and to a certain degree, once again, you have a buffer of, okay, you know that your scope is going to partially change, but at a certain point, too much is too much. And it's like, okay, cool, we're making progress, but to what end? This is not the game that I wanted to make anymore. And that is once again a point where you have to take a step back and look at, okay, what can we do? Can we go back? So like if we have a game A and game B and like you went all the way to game B, is there a way we can pull it a bit more back towards game A so you still have that game vision that you originally wanted? Or does this mean that, hey, the game idea, and this is kind of always a rough one, the game idea that you originally had, it's just not as good or as feasible as you had initially hoped. And then the problem is, if you run out of momentum, what do you do? Momentum is not an infinitely renewable resource. Momentum is something that you can get partially back, but it's something that once your game runs out, in my opinion, your game kind of dies, unfortunately. And I think this is something that a lot of developers struggle with accepting that, like, oh no, but I've already worked 9 months on this game, because sunk cost fallacy. If I just give it another 2 months, it's gonna be done. The problem is, like I said in the beginning, then you're working purely on discipline. You're not working on motivation, you're not working on momentum, and you're not really feeling like you're doing that progress day in, day out. And I think you have to be a really built different kind of person in a good way to actually still be able to power through this and make it good. You are, in that regards, a true professional if you can actually do that, because that's at the end of the day what a professional does. They can work through things even if they don't fully like it. But for a lot of people, game development, it starts out definitely as a hobby. They don't just immediately go in and be like, okay, I am now a professional game designer and I know even if I don't really like the game, I'm gonna keep giving my all towards making this the best game. You probably are like, actually, I kind of just wanna give up. I kind of wanna maybe either stop game development, or what happens more is, hey, shiny object syndrome. You join the game jam and suddenly that game jam made a lot of progress. And then once again, you have momentum in something else. And then the question is, well, I don't wanna go back to that other thing because it's not interesting for me. It's a rough one. But I think at a certain point, I think that's kind of one of the discoveries that I've made is canceling games to a certain degree. It's not a failure because you've still learned about it. Even if all you've learned is that, hey, actually, I shouldn't make Souls-like games as a solo indie developer in a 3-month scope period. But you still always learn from it. And I think it's much more kind of self-sabotaging to be like, no, actually, I told my audience and I already paid for the Steam credit and whatever, and I'm gonna make the Souls-like, to then power through it for another few months, working purely on discipline, making a game that probably is not what you envisioned, what your audience envisioned, and it's not as fun as you could have made it because you missed that week-over-week progress, you missed all that momentum and things like that. And then if you do release that game, well, because of those flaws during the development process, your game is not going to be as fun for players, which is going to lead to negative reviews. And at that point, if you've crunched all the time on making a game, because it's kind of a crunch if you're working on a game that you don't like, the game comes out, the game doesn't succeed because of some of the issues from, hey, lack of heart from the developer being put into the game. That's the problem yet with Forge Industry. It can be very tempting to just give up on game dev because you were like, I don't want to deal with this problem now, I'm going to deal with it for future me. And then future me is like, bro, what did you give me? I don't want to do this. I'm done with game dev. And that's also not what I want, because there's a lot of good things you can do with game dev as well. You just need to have a more healthy approach to it all. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about in this video. I hope this makes sense. Do you have good momentum on your game? Honestly, is kind of the question for me. Like, if you look back, if you boot up a build from a month ago or 2 weeks ago, because you should be using version control, by the way, if you don't. So you can very easily go back in time instead of just having folder like game name final August or whatever. Is the game much better? If it isn't, look at, okay, do I still enjoy this game? How do I feel about development? Where did it go wrong? I think it's better to ask current you these questions instead of future you, and then you can, yeah, sure, you can make that post-mortem of my game failed miserably and I sold 10 copies, tell me what went wrong. The answer is just, you didn't like working on your game anymore and you were too afraid to admit it. It's something because it feels like failure, but at the end of the day, we're all human, to err is human, you'll fail at certain points, whether it's in game dev or other parts in life. Just accept it and move on. That's all I really had to say. I hope this kind of gave you some more introspection or whatever. If you're new here, we upload 2 videos every week talking about game development and the things that we've been learning along the way, running our own studio, making our own games and all of that. If that's something that you're interested in, be sure to head down below and subscribe, as it really helps me out and you get these videos delivered to your inbox 2 times a week, like I said. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!